and people are going to create, people are going to participate in it's like a birthing process is how I look at it. And so we are vulnerable, and I think that people, whether we're acknowledging, it's like I remember saying one time in an essay about how when we're not allowed to acknowledge our histories, for instance, our childhood, that we recreate them in order to, people will say that, oh, you're manifesting that. They do all this really abusive stuff in the language nowadays. It's kind of like, to me, the Oprah type thing. And I'm thinking, Oprah, listen to your inner child, because until you do your own integration work, you should never, how dare you sit at the helm and call yourself, the leader of emotional integration. You aren't, okay, period. Because I know how I feel in your presence.
No,
which is not a good feeling.
Yeah.
And so I think that if people are not, so it depends, to me, there is that whole really relevant level of this time of collective change when I believe we're just moving to a different level of consciousness, which is sort of the one that I was gleaning over a little while ago there, which has to do with individually acknowledging our potential to exist as divine beings on much healthier and more holistic levels in these bodies, in this world. Well, we cannot do that if we're not integrated and we're not embodied emotionally. The only thing we can do if we're split off from ourselves is perpetuate self-alienation. And if we're not living in a harmonic state with ourselves and our inner child, if we're split off from that history and saying, oh, it's okay to do that to children, then we're going to have this world we're living in, Or as the collective, as say if there is this intergalactic pressure cooker that's getting turned up in terms of a shift in consciousness, that just amplifies everything. You know what I'm saying? So if people say, for instance, if I remember when I was doing that initial integration work, and I was working with a therapist who told me that a lot of clients that she had they ended up getting their funding initially because she had a grant for rape victims. And she started to find out that a lot of women who were raped as adults ended up, when they were in therapy, uncovering this history of child sexual abuse. And that it isn't like you manifest rape as a woman, but you're more vulnerable to not protecting yourself if you don't realize that they didn't have the right to do that to you in the first place, because they never allowed you to acknowledge that. And so I do think that that level of physical earth change destruction, that all kind of stems from our collective self-alienation, that we, in these next few years, if we continue to work toward a holistic relationship with ourselves, our own histories, and become centered, from a centered place, from a balanced place, we will create a totally beautiful, transcendent experience. Whether that's likely, from right here, all I see is people setting out to manifest incredibly destructive things, but I think that that's because they're not centered inside themselves.
Well, for instance, 3 years ago is when all the stuff started with the talk of the quote-unquote recession. 3 years ago, when it was fine. And I'm just using this as, for instance, because the media, for years before we even were hit with anything, were saying stuff. And people stopped spending money out of fear 3 years before we even had to really worry about it.
Exactly.
And my idea is if we didn't even start that talk 3 years ago, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Exactly.
To a point. There may be a couple little things, but not as massive as it is right now.
Yes, that's absolutely true, what you just said. And what's the primal kernel of truth in that is this power we have to affect the collective by what we're believing and what we're focusing on and this sort of stuff. And I know that all these, to me, one of sort of my pet peeves with the New Age movement is that they kind of co-opted these larger spiritual truths, and they're sort of twisting them and doing all this very weird stuff around it. But on the most base level, we are these magical divine beings, and we've been convinced we're not through, I think, from our inception on this planet, which is a whole nother story. But I think it's a false mirror that we've been subjected to through time and space, where we're sort of under this hypnotic, distorted belief that we are not what we really are. Okay, but we will still demonstrate the truth to ourselves, just like a child will. It's like that thing, if you want to know what's going on in a child's home, watch them on the playground. The same thing is true with people who have experienced abuse as children, who are now adults, and who are still alienated from that and condemning their inner child to secrecy and allegiance to the abuse. They will reenact that story because it's part of our power, whether we're acknowledging it or not. We're going to keep that truth alive, and if we're not allowed to consciously own the truth of our own lives, we are going to we'll draw those stories. We'll retell the story in our current lives, maybe like once removed by. It's like a performance piece almost. It's like we're going to draw these devastations to us, to re-experience them, so that we'll have the hope and the potential to actually integrate them by feeling how we really do feel about these experiences. And whether we take that opportunity and feel like we have the safety and the support to do that integration work at the time or not, we'll keep drawing it to us. We keep manifesting the truth, because the truth continues to exist. And when it's forced underground, like I've said in this one essay, it's like this long buried truth, begins to fester and to feed upon itself and to become more and more of what it is every day. And like attracts like. And so this strong unspoken truth begins to pull toward itself reflections of its own existence. And this is allowed, and it's allowed because we forgot and no longer admit that our outer world is nothing more than a perfect mirror image of our inner state of being, that we're looking inside ourselves at these long buried stories. And I think that they're just what you're describing, your ability to see that with the recession comes from a seat of integration within you, okay? Because when you're emotionally embodied, when I'm just sitting here inside my own space and I'm inhabiting my body, and no other thought forms are ruling me, what I'm allowed to see or know, no one's shutting me down from my feelings or my perceptions, and I have a state, that to me is what integration is. And from that state we begin to create and participate in life from a holistic place. And if everyone were doing that, we would look out and see a holistic world, and that we would all inhabit together.
Thank you so much for coming on. We are now just streaming, but we're not on live, so they're going to be cutting us off here very quickly.
Okay.
I want to make sure we get any information out. Where can people go to get your book, or if they have questions and they want to ask you some questions, where should they go?
Okay, well, my little book, The Edge of the World, I have in PDF on my website. I'm also a glass artist, so I have a lot of my glass jewelry and beads and things like that on there. And so my website is innerworlddesigns.com, and that would be the place to go. And everything I've got is on there right now.
Is there anything that you'd like to leave the listeners with real quick before we sign off?
I just want to encourage people to continue down that path of light. I have so much admiration, and I know how lonely and hard, and the price that we can end up having to pay for our own souls in this world, that I just weep at the feet of anyone who has the courage to do that work. And it makes me happy and I feel so much safer living in a world with people who are doing this. So.
Well, thank you so much for coming on Heal Yourself Talk Radio.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.